I'm Dr. Cathy. I am a mom and a physician. I'm a trauma surgeon and have been for the past 25 years. And I'm also an Ironman. And so all of those things together, one's not more important than the other, but I was always a runner. In high school, I ran cross country, and I was a kind of a middle of the pack runner, not very fast. So I tended to, even when I ran track, do the longer distances, you know, the mile and the 2 mile. So as I got through college and medical school, I continued to run, not so much race, but run just to stay fit and as a stress reliever. And throughout that whole time, you know, I trained in the classic way and ate in the classic way and fueled for training in the classic way, basically on carbohydrates. I was for quite a few years on the Pritikin diet, which is a no-fat diet, and was essentially, I was a vegetarian for a few years as well, and never really felt healthy, felt a little bit weak during that time. I'm positive I didn't do it properly, probably was more like on not enough protein and very, very high carbohydrate diet. So, you know, I didn't really notice much more of a problem, but because through medical school and residency, surgical residency was 5 years. And, you know, you learn pretty quickly there's only 168 hours in the week because you're in the hospital for at least 100 of them. And then the other sleep and all of your life needs have to be squeezed into the other, you know, 50 or 60 hours that you're actually not in the hospital. And when you're young, you know, you can put up with that. Your body's pretty resilient, and you haven't accumulated a lot of metabolic damage. So I didn't notice a problem or any, let's say, any downside to that kind of eating. And I was, you know, trained to believe in the nutrition, the food pyramid as written. And quite frankly, we only got 4 hours of nutrition education in medical school, 4 hours in 4 years. And I look back on that now and think, but, you know, nutrition is the basis of good physiology, and that relationship has still never acknowledged in what I call big medicine, right? So what I learned in medical school was all about pharmaceuticals and interventions, and I became a surgeon, so I'm an expert at interventions. And where they fail, you know, you can go to pharmaceuticals and vice versa. Pharmaceuticals, and when they fail, interventions. And there often are times when interventions and pharmaceuticals are needed. But as I got older and I ended up going into practicing general surgery, I was in the military because they put me through medical school. And so even in the military, I was dealing with young, healthy soldiers for the most part, fit people, predominantly, in my experience, not because of the way they eat, but because of the level of activity that they have. So again, young people, when they move around, they burn a lot of calories. They're metabolically still pretty fit, and their body can make up for any dietary indiscretions. And but towards the end of my tenure in the military, we started seeing a lot more of the government cracking down on overweight soldiers. And so I was doing a lot of I saw a lot of patients for thyroid issues. You know, did they need their thyroids checked out, you know, taken out, that kind of thing. And the prescription for being overweight in the military, like it is in so many other places, was just to exercise more and diet, right? Less calories in, burn more calories out. And what we know now, the data is quite clear: a calorie is not a calorie, particularly for women who are getting, you know, more towards their mid to late 30s. So, that was my experience in the military, and I was getting older at the same time. And as I became a practicing trauma surgeon, I went and did a fellowship in surgical critical care. And I always loved the ICU because physiology, I learned firsthand and from my professors, physiology is very, very dependable. So if a patient's not responding, it's not that there's something wrong with the patient, it's that you haven't figured out what the true physiologic problem is. Because if you can stop the physiologic issue, then the patient will get better. So there's a tendency in medicine, if it's something you're doing is not working, you tend to blame the patient. There must be something wrong, you must be an outlier, but in fact, my professors, I was quite fortunate to have professors that were experts at physiology. And, what I know for sure is that physiology is dependable, and that there's nothing wrong with most people. Only 5% of the people have a true genetic problem. So as I was taking care of patients, I would see that if we could just fix the, essentially the fire under the pot and not just treat the symptoms, that's when we are really getting to good medicine. And so again, I still continue to get older. And as I reached my mid to late 30s, and as critical care, ICU care got better and better, I started to see people who looked more and more like me, right? So when I was a young surgeon, all the patients looked old, right? And I didn't identify with them personally because I was young and healthy. And I just assumed that was because I ate well and took care of myself. When in actuality, I look back and I was not healthy at all. I was what you call skinny fat. I was always thin, but increasingly, I had was starting to feel maybe the effects of this, the way I was living, the lifestyle. So not only was it high carb and high sugar and high caffeine, and with poor sleep, it was very high stress. So all of these things over time start to wear on your body. And as I started to see patients that looked more and more like me. Trauma patients come in. My favorite patient to treat is a patient who's healthy before they get hurt. And those people get better rather quickly. But as I started to see these young people, some of whom were quite fit, have complications, I thought, what's the difference between me and them? How do I not turn into one of these patients? Because increasingly we were seeing younger and younger people with diabetes, with heart disease, and with strokes. So I thought, if you saw an obese person, you would make a justification, I would in my mind, saying, well, if they just ate right and took care of themselves, they would have never had the stroke or the heart attack. But then, you see thin people or buff people, athletes, so then you have, kind of a fallback position. Well, it must be their genetics. So I think one of the biggest fallacies visited on the American or on people by medicine is that you're a victim of your genetics. And we know now with all the work in epigenetics that it's entirely not true. That it's environment that transforms your genetics and decides how your body will behave and how your life will be. And so I took a real hard look at my life at this point, because I was one day in the ICU. I remember like it was yesterday. I had discharged a young patient, maybe a 50-year-old man, and he was doing well. So I had discharged him to a regular room. And when I came up later in the day to check, he was still there. And I said, why hasn't, so-and-so been transferred out? We need the bed. And they said, oh, that's a new patient. But he looked exactly like the old patient. And so I realized we have this revolving door. They just keep coming. The people keep coming. And I started to think, when people leave the hospital, they would often ask me, well, what do I do from here? And I would say, well, just eat well, and exercise. And I started to think, well, what does that mean? Nobody knows what that means. I don't know what that means. So that's really when my journey started to look at my own life. And at the same time, my sister was doing a sprint triathlon. And, I had been a big Ironman fan since the beginning, because right about when I was in high school, the Ironman was, Dave Scott and Mark Allen and all the classic big players were on TV every year. And I said to myself, one of those days I'm going to do an Ironman. My sister signed up for a little sprint triathlon and said I should come with her. So I did. And I was hooked, my life just never gave me the time to train, but I was reasonably fit. So I could do a short course without much. I just had to get a bike. And so I started to think about, and I started to do more triathlons, and then my nutrition started to fail. I ran a New York City marathon and I bonked at 8 miles. I never bonked, I had done, 10 Ks. And so I'd never gone distances where, just eating sugar for an hour could make up for everything else. And when I started to stretch out the distances and ask my body to go longer, I started to notice the deficit. So I decided right then and there that, I was kind of a fraud, and certainly at the very least I was a hypocrite, because I was telling my patients to do something that I wasn't doing. And, I think if you're going to hire a lawyer, well, you want that lawyer to win cases. You want him to have a track record. And if you hire an accountant, you hope that he's never been audited and found guilty of, fraud. So I thought, why aren't doctors the healthiest people we know? Because within my circle, I would say easily the majority of people, including the endocrinologists, were obese, not just overweight and over fat, but literally obese. And, kind of having the lifestyle that I had, it takes you a few cups of coffee to get going in the morning, and a few more to sustain you during the day. And then maybe a glass of wine or two at night to calm you down so you can go back to sleep and get up in the morning and do it all over again. So I started to look at, some of the different options there were in terms of nutrition. And I came across, the whole idea of fat metabolism. And at that point, I was thinking of it only in terms of long distance athletes. And as my distances spread out, I saw the utility of that. But, quite a few people I would say, again, the majority of people in endurance sports are not aware of optimized fat metabolism, OFM. And I met Peter in January of 2015 at a metabolic conference, because as I got into this, I was horrified at what we feed patients in the hospital. And so I did a poster about the different feedings that we give, both tube feedings and diets for our post-ops and our ICU patients. And I presented that at a metabolic conference in Florida. And that's where I met Peter. And we started to have these discussions about fat metabolism, because I was really focused kind of on ketosis. And, I was really upset when I started to learn that how the injured brain actually prefers ketones and can utilize ketones easier than glucose, when especially the damaged brain that has a potential to recover. And, none of this was taught. And, it's, thank goodness for the internet, because, time back, you can't find a lot of this literature published in the journals that most medical schools and hospitals carry in their libraries. So I started to feel really good personally. I was road testing all of this stuff, and I was starting to perform better, not just on my workouts and my races here and there, but during the day in my life. And it really got my attention. And I kind of dabbled in it at first, because the sugar addiction and the carbohydrate addiction is a very real physiologic thing. You know, we know that there's published data, again, with rats. You offer them a reward after a task, they'll choose sugar and sweeten things over cocaine. So we know that the physiologic addiction to sugar is very, very real. And I want to just say, I should have said earlier at the outset, everything that I speak to is I always promise two things. One is that I road test it myself. So as a human being and as a physician, you know, I promise that I tell you, do as I do, because otherwise it's just hearsay. And number two is everything is published in literature. It's not usually the most mainstream literature, because that can be quite political, and there's a lot of competition for funding, and but it's all published literature. You have to go to more of the, you know, I call them off-Broadway medical journals to see some of the literature, but it's really profound. And that's, you know, particularly, again, in this time that we're in, people are terrified of getting sick. And again, there's this misconception that just because you're exposed to a virus, you're gonna get sick. And again, that couldn't be further from the truth. We're exposed to viruses and bacteria all day long, every day, for the past, you know, couple of millennia, as long as mammals have been around. We're constantly. So the question really is, are you ready? What kind of onslaught are you ready for? And what people don't understand about their physiology is they have this army inside them. And it's gotten lazy and stupid, you know, because this affects your mind as well. And you're trying to fight, you know, single-handedly against another army coming at you, when all you have to do is unleash what you have at your disposal. So people would just, and I don't know, I haven't figured out really what keeps people from wanting to do the work, because it's very simple, though it's not easy. It's not easy to break patterns, but I'm working a lot on that too, because mindset is very important. And we know, again, from epigenetics that one thought can change gene expression. That's not woo-woo. That's not a mystery. It's not, you know, hopeful thinking. It's documented science. So what I've found in my races, though, as I feel better during tremendous exertion, like over the course of an Ironman, when you feel good, you can make better choices. So, you know, when I'm on the bike at mile 80 and I'm like, you know, I really want to get off this bike, I remind myself to check in. Is there something wrong with your legs? No. Are you breathing okay? Yeah. So it's just a mental thing, like I want to get off the bike. It's not like I'm going to die. Maybe I'm going to have a heart attack. Maybe I'm going to get a cramp. I'm going to pull a muscle. I'm going to get an injury. You know, we're always trying to protect ourselves. And as you start to get this metabolic strength, and you start to be able to accomplish things, you start to be confident in your body. And that reverses the mindset that, oh my God, I'm going to get sick. Oh my God, I'm going to do everything right. And I'm going to walk down my driveway. And the virus, I always tell people, the virus isn't jumping out of your bushes. It's not laying in wait to attack you. Your body's doing it all the time. It's fighting it all the time. And your body's a fortress. So, you know, just keep putting more bricks and mortar in that wall, and you're going to be not only okay, you're going to thrive. So this has been an incredible journey. And I see a new medicine, if we want to even call it that. I don't know what to call it, but people don't have to get sick. The good news is that there's nothing wrong with you. The body is extraordinarily resilient. And even what people would label bad behaviors like cravings, addictions, are your body's response trying to manage the onslaught of trauma that's coming to it, both physically and nutritionally. And people need to shift their focus and realize that their bodies have done a remarkable job of letting them not die. And that's the really good news. And again, it's not the normal narrative for, I think medicine today, in my experience, leaves people with this sense, particularly in these times this year, that you're frail and that you're going to get hurt and you're going to get sick, and it's inevitable. And you're unfortunately a victim of your genetics, but that we're here to help you when things go south. And the truth, that couldn't be further from the truth. The good news is that all the physiologic mechanisms that allowed our ancestors to survive, not getting to eat every day, having to move all day, every day, the beautiful ability of the body to be extraordinarily efficient by running on fat, all of those mechanisms have not evolved as fast as our lifestyle has evolved. They're all still there. And so not only harnessing those can they help us survive, because of our affluence and the availability. And on this OFM and VESPA program, all of the knowledge behind tweaking and optimizing carbohydrate use strategically, those physiology, our normal physiology, will help us thrive. I mean, I have this vision of a world where people never get sick. Like people say, remember we used to get sick? And we're just running around doing Olympic Games all day long, just like it used to be. In the very beginning, the Olympics was for the whole populace. And people got out and competed. And, you know, luckily now we can just have fun and we don't have to play to the death, right? But in some of those events. But I mean, we don't have to worry about surviving anymore because we can just get up and go to the grocery store or the refrigerator. So now what can we do? I don't think the bottom of human physiology has ever been tapped. And one of the reasons too is because most of our professional athletes and our Olympians still use the high carbohydrate fueling system. So what you see is kind of a very short career for most people, because one of the things about this OFM program and being fat optimized is that you don't accumulate damage. So, you know, it rescues people from the ravages of metabolic illness. And it's really just restoring what's normal. And once you restore it, like you would an old car, well, then you can start thinking about, well, what can I do with this? How can it perform? And, you know, that's really exciting to me. I think it's a really great message for people to hear. So that's kind of been my evolution. And, you know, I was thinking about this today, that I don't really think of my training and my racing anymore as something else that I do. It's what I do. It's no different than the part of my life that has me go to work or cook, or it's part of living. And so I think if we can shift our mindset to understanding that movement and physical activity, and then this way of eating and living with OFM, you know, it makes sense and it pours over into every other aspect of our lives, so that it's one of those things that I would never be without, because it impacts how good a parent I am, how good a doctor I am. And it doesn't, whatever it might cost in terms of time and effort, it more than pays it back a million times over. Because I'm 54 years old, but I feel like, I mean, I'm racing better than I ever have. So I'm getting better with age. And when you look at, you know, Peter's athletes, they are at the top of their game and getting better as they get older. So that's really a phenomenal thing that you can, and that's where I said, like, you know, there is normal breakdown as we live and are exposed to metabolic stress and, you know, oxidative stress. But to the extent that we can limit our own production of that, our internal production of that, by our lifestyle choices and the way we eat and move, then we can really not only just slow the decline that people normally associate with aging and actually reverse it. I don't think I would test metabolically at 54. And my body doesn't feel like, I mean, I'm feeling better and better. This is a cumulative effect when you go on, learn how to optimize your fat metabolism. And, you know, it's the difference between an oak tree and a palm tree. You know, the palm tree is quite pretty, but it's not enough to be pretty on the outside. The palm tree doesn't have a big root structure, so the slightest stress will knock it over. And an oak tree has deep roots and it's solid, and a storm can come through, and that tree, a few branches might break, but that tree is solid, it's there. And that's really, it feels good to feel good. So I noticed the difference at work. You know, trauma surgery, at least where I practice, in the state that I practice, mandates that the doctor has to sleep in the hospital, right? So generally, we would take 24-hour shifts, come in at 6 a.m. and leave at 6 a.m. And statistically, most trauma comes from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. That's just when people have a tendency to make worse choices, let's say. And, you know, when I was eating mostly carb-based diet, I would have to eat constantly. And it was really felt the effects of fatigue if I didn't eat. I was constantly eating, you know, what we have around the hospital to snack on are graham crackers, saltines, the fruit juices, apple juice, cranberry juice, grape juice, and Jell-O, pudding. You know, that's all sugar. So I just have to constantly eat all the time. And when I switched to a fat-based diet, and especially using the Vespa with a supplement, True Niagen, I had not only physical endurance, but more physical endurance, but I wasn't always hungry. As a matter of fact, I really don't get hungry anymore. When I haven't eaten for a prolonged period of time, say me like 14 or 16 hours, I tend to get tired, and then I realize, oh, it might be time to eat a little something. But you don't have the headaches and just the constant need to refuel. But over and above the physical aspect of it was the mental clarity. You know, when your surgeon's elbow deep in your belly, you don't want them to lose any kind of focus or mental clarity. You know, you don't want to start thinking, oh, I gotta get out of here and I gotta get something to eat, you know? So the resilience that this way of life affords is remarkable from that perspective. And two, then, you know, you have resilience because you don't want to leave your best at work, right? When you come home, especially after a 24-hour shift, your family hasn't seen you. They want to see you. And, you know, you've just given everything at work. You may have been, and I may have been in the operating room all night. And so when I come home, you also want to have something to give your family. So that resilience carries over, you know, and in terms of mood stabilization, being able to think on your feet. And you hear that from a lot of athletes too, during the course, especially the high higher performing, the top of the game athletes on this program, that the mental resilience is unbelievable. And that's why, the Department of Defense has put a lot of money behind the whole concept of fat-based training, because, being in especially covert operations teams that have to go deep underwater for long periods of time, into austere environments for long periods of time, you can't carry a lot of food, and you also need to maintain tremendous mental clarity. And what I do for a living is, I'm not getting shot at, but it's quite the same thing. It's a trauma. It's a very high intensity, critical situation where you need to maintain mental and emotional composure at all times. I've noticed a tremendous difference over the years, and it's not the maturity of being an older, wiser trauma surgeon. It's much more than that, because the game is always changing in trauma, and you have to kind of race to keep up. So that's been a wonderful gift of the lifestyle. The other thing I really noticed too is that after a long shift, my body's not damaged. Like I don't get like edema in my legs. And I noticed that in racing too. I just did my first ultramarathon, and, afterwards I'm not wrecked. I mean, a lot of people you see, they get wrecked after a 10K, but because you're not generating a lot of metabolic damage while you're actually racing, or living your life, because one of the things Peter is so good at is helping people put their life into perspective. And, he said, Cathy, your life is an endurance event. And, my work, my shift, my 24-hour shift is an endurance event, because a lot of times I'm on my feet the whole time. And, that's true of most people's lives, particularly now with the high stress environment. People's lives are endurance events, especially working mothers that have to care for the family. Then they go to work and they have a job, and they come home and they have to start caring for the family again. There's no break. And that's just an endurance event. So leading up to my 50-mile race, I had like about 72 hours of call within 96 hours. And then I had 4 days off before the race. So Peter said, well, you're going to run your endurance event, and it's going to be followed by another 50-mile endurance event. And then when I was done, I ran the 50-mile on Saturday. We drove home on Sunday. And then Monday, I started an 8-day run of ICU shifts, which are essentially they're 12-hour shifts, but with my commute and everything, it turns out to be a 14-hour day. And this is under, again, a very high stress environment with, having to put hoods on and gown up and take care of do procedures, on viral, some of the virus patients and whatnot. So, I went from endurance event to endurance event to endurance event, and, no problem. When I used to race using carbohydrate mostly for fuel, like the goos and like the gels, and the energy bars and the sport drinks and that kind of thing, I would feel bad during the race. You can feel there's a point where you have to keep taking it very frequently, and you start to get kind of this frantic feeling if there's a long distance between aid stations. Like if you don't have stuff on you, on your person, you're like, oh my God, I need to get to the next aid. I really need something. It was interesting. And I didn't even drink that much water. After, I made one pit stop, like when I came off the 15-mile Appalachian Trail segment. And I was drinking, but not a lot. And I really didn't have to make any pit stops, maybe one or two more. And I wasn't eating that much. And I noticed that too. You don't have to take in as much fuel. Like when I used to be racing, there are these calculations. Everybody has their magic number of how to avoid the bonk. And in my experience with people that I've raced with, and like triathlon club members and running club members, a lot of times taking in what they say the prescribed amount of calories necessitates some pit stops, especially during the longer races like an Ironman, or for the really hardcore people that want the traditional badge of courage, just pooping your pants, or it's quite interesting, or vomiting, that's almost like celebrated as that you're tough, instead of realizing that it's an epic failure of nutrition. And the body's made to work much better than that. And so not only did I not feel bad during the race, I didn't feel bad after the race. And I could go out a couple days later for a run when, normally I'd take a week or two off, try to recover, try to get rid of that muscle soreness, and it just didn't happen. I had a little bit of edema, just a little bit, but certainly nothing any worse than anything I ever had from doing a 24-hour shift, at work. So it's quite remarkable. It's like I said, it's almost like it didn't happen, but I keep thinking back, like, I can't believe I did that. And like, I'm ready to go do another one. Now I'm starting to think, maybe I could do 100 miles,